Hi, now it's Mrs. Shrett studying again with literary analysis, but this time we're going to look at how to do a paragraph. It's so exciting. Stay tuned and let's look. So with literary analysis, most teachers, including me, we try to break it up for you into what we call a teal, or maybe you've heard of a peel paragraph. I'm going to stick with that, even though it's more of a guide. And if you want to, you can experiment and play with it a little bit as to how you go about it. So first of all, we have teal. So teal that's just the cleaner vacuuming, and I'm not going to worry about it because I need to get this recorded. So teal, we have a topic sentence. Your topic sentence is going to be your mini thesis, okay? So it's like that part of the signposting you had from your introduction, that if you haven't seen that video, I recommend you watch it. And you take that, you reword it, and you put that as your little mini argument that you're about to elaborate on in your paragraph. Now, your elaboration is kind of a nice optional. I'm going to say it is a nice optional. It is good and helpful to help give the reader or marker a deeper understanding of the topic or aspect of your argument that you're trying to look at. But, if you aren't exactly clear what it is, then just go and try your best to kind of experiment and see if it works for you or not. If you don't use it, that's not the end of the world. But it is kind of showing how important or how it is reflected in there. And then you have your evidence. This is the most important. So these two, they're the same color. And the reason for that is because they're interchangeable. You can't, to do good evidence, you're going to have to give an explanation, and you need to do good evidence with patterns of examples. I love that phrase that I got. So patterns of examples means that it's not a one-off, because if it's a one-off, the marker's going, is that really something that you can prove, or is it just well, that just happened that once, but it's an anomaly. It didn't actually ever happen again. Whereas if you get 2 to 3 quotes that show direct or indirect quotes, so direct is quotes that are word for word from the text, indirects are you summarizing that in your own words. But you're basically giving those quotes with analysis, saying this is an example of this aspect of my argument, okay? So you need analysis, okay? And I will go through a kind of average example with you. I didn't put one thing in that happens a lot, but we'll get to that another time. But basically here, the other thing I want to focus on is this idea of context. Context is really important. You can't just chuck a quote in. If you chuck a quote in, you're not giving the reader an understanding. Like, I'm really sorry, but there's very few markers who have memorized word for word with their didactic, or whatever the word is, memory, the entire novel, okay? We haven't got it like memorized, photographic memory type thing. So, oh joy. So because of that, you not putting context in means that the reader or the marker has to think a lot about where this fits in, what's happening, who said what was going on, why it's important, sort of thing. Okay, so by giving this context of who said what was happening, and how it kind of fits in, you're giving the reader the chance to go, oh yeah, I do know that moment. Yes, I do understand now how it fits into this thing. And then the analysis, which is literally like an analytical literary analysis, it is the most important thing. So you have to explain the meaning of it. Sorry, I just meant to. And this is where you are explaining the meaning of the evidence and how it relates to your mini thesis, okay? So you're kind of just breaking that apart for us and saying, it means this, it shows this, it's the reader now understands this perspective of the character, okay? So this is the meat of it, okay? So this part's very important. And then with your link, it's literally, oh, sorry. It just went down. You're establishing a link between the evidence and your mini thesis, as well as your overall thesis. So you're just tying it together. This is where you use beautiful cohesive devices like consequently, evidently, it is clear that this shows this aspect of my thesis, okay? And I go, oh, that's so beautifully nice. It's kind of like tying a bow on a present. If you don't put a link in, it just looks like you just couldn't be bothered to wrap it up. Okay, it's the details. Okay, so let's look at an example. All right. So I'm going to go back to an example I used in the introduction one, which was William Thornhill's obsession with ownership is selfish. To what extent do you agree with this interpretation of his character? Justify your position. Okay, so we're going back to my thesis that I used, which is that he, through the protagonist, William Thornhill, the reader sees the devastating results obsession leads to through his amoral actions as he selfishly seizes ownership of Thornhill Place at the expense of his family and self-respect. Okay, so that's an adequate thesis that we're going through, and we're going to use it. Now, you need to know what your thesis is in order to write your paragraph. It's always about coming back to your thesis and drawing on a point of it and expanding it to make it like a magnifying glass, okay? So you start with your thesis and then you magnify it in your paragraphs, okay? So we are looking at amoral actions, okay? So his amoral actions, that's what I'm going to focus on, how he became amoral because of his obsession. So this is my average example that I'm kind of trying to show you the joys I have when I mark my students' assignments. And, you know, sometimes it is less joyful than other times. But when your teacher may say a few things, you might go, oh, wow, I've done that before. I promise you, I did not use a single student's example. I made this up myself, okay? So this is my own work based on my experience of the things that students tend to do wrong when they write their essays, okay? So we've got Thornhill is very obsessed with owning Thornhill Place and does not think about his actions. Okay, so there's no cohesive device, okay? So just adding in a word like such as firstly, which is a really average sort of word, but firstly, it is clear that Thornhill is very obsessed with owning Thornhill Place. So you could try and use that sort of cohesive device. Otherwise, you may, as this is actually the middle paragraph, the second paragraph that I'd be writing, I could put the word subsequently, and that's what I do in my next beautiful paragraph, high-level paragraph that I wrote. So subsequently, Thornhill is very obsessed with owning Thornhill Place and does not think about his actions. Okay, so very obsessed is kind of low-level language. We're not really using high sophisticated vocabulary here. And does not think about his actions. Like, that doesn't really talk about the immorality, so it doesn't quite look at the amoral actions. It would be better if I could say, and therefore engages in immoral actions. Okay, and that's sort of the thing that I'm trying to show. It's very basic. There's no deep thinking, and it doesn't clearly link back to the thesis. It just basically links back to the thesis, okay? So then I've elaborated, okay? He looks at his place as part of himself and does all that he can to own it, even killing the Darug people. Again, pretty basic language, killing, we have. So it's part of himself and does all he can to own it, even killing the Darug people. There's no real importance of the obsession. We haven't kind of looked at the importance of this thesis. It's just kind of giving a bit more of what Thornhill expects, okay? So it's kind of average. I'd like to say that I've done well at writing an average thing. And this is my favorite thing that students often do. The gun went off with a puff of blue smoke and a pop that sounded puny in all this air. He thought he must have missed, for Whisker Harry was still standing there with that look on his face, as if nothing could touch him. beautifully referenced, beautifully inverted commas, and that's it. I just have a random quote put in because it sounded good. Because here I talked about killing the Darug people. So I thought it'd be good to put in a quote about someone killing a Darug person. Now the thing is, there's no context here. Can you see? I don't know where this is. As the marker, I'd be going, where's this quote? Who has the gun? Who's killing Whisker Harry? Obviously, I do happen to know this point, but it's really unclear how it links to him wanting to own Thornhill Place. It's not even a very good quote. Ooh, I don't know what I did there. It's not actually a very good quote at saying that the place is part of him and he's going to kill the Darug people. There is better quotes. In fact, the better quote would be the quote that he makes to decide to do it. So when he goes, it's a place between his wife and the place, and he can't choose, and so he thinks it's worth doing at all costs, and if anyone talks, he'll cut their tongue out. That's most probably a better way at showing what I've said there. So this sort of thing, I'm just randomly putting a quote in, there's no context, there's no analysis, it's just a quote, is what markers don't really like. Sorry, this is an average example, as I said. And then after he gained his land, gains his land, after he gained his land, he felt confused and alone. It was the picture of a man puzzled by what life could turn up. Again, another random quote, not linked with context or understanding of how it shows that he's confused and alone. Basically, I can see the word confused and puzzled are similar, so I'm going to say, yeah, there's some connection there, but a better way of doing it would be after he'd gained his land, he felt confused and alone, as seen in his reflection on the portrait that graced Colburn Hall, where he saw it as a picture of a man puzzled by what life could turn up. Okay, so that might be a better idea. And also, it only shows him as confused, it doesn't show him as alone. And the problem with this confused thing is it doesn't actually link to my thesis at all, because I've tried to talk about how he's selfish, and I've tried to talk about how he is disconnected from family. So alone is actually a good point, but this evidence doesn't actually show that he's alone, it just shows he's confused. So possibly I could try and link it to self-respect, but it's a very tenuous sort of link. Okay, so again, not very good evidence. In the end, he could not understand why it did not feel like a triumph. So again, no context. I don't know where it is in the play, I don't know what he's doing, and I don't know what doesn't feel like a triumph. Okay, and there's no analysis of how it makes the reader think about Thornhill. Okay, but it is a reasonable average attempt at analysing, and unfortunately it just doesn't link very well about how he doesn't think of his actions, because, you know, the focus was meant to be on the Darug people, and now it's all about how he felt afterwards. So it is a bit confusing. Good job, Mrs. Stret, on making a very average paragraph. So here we have the only, one of the only, in the end, we can say is a cohesive device. But we have basically one of the few cohesive devices. Evidently, the reason, the reader understands, that's a typo, the reader understands that the reason was that it was due to the loss of his family and self-respect. So in the end, he did not feel like a triumph. The reader understands that the reason was that it was due to the loss of his family and self-respect. So the link is trying to analyze the quote, which isn't exactly ideal. You're kind of wanting to tie the whole thing up, not just add to what you've said previously. So there is my beautifully average example. So let's move on to a higher level example where we have a bit better vocab and a bit better analysis. So again, we have a beautiful cohesive device here, subsequently. So I start with my topic sentence or my mini thesis where I go, subsequently, Thornhill's compulsion to own his own land eventually results in his avaricious annihilation of the Darug people in order to lay claim to Thornhill Place. I just want to point out to you that Darug can be spelled with a H or without a H. It's kind of interchangeable. So here we're saying that his compulsion to own his land results in his greedy annihilation or selfish annihilation of the Darug people in order to lay claim to Thornhill Place. And that's my thesis. That's a reasonable, like my mini thesis expanded, saying basically it results in him acting immorally by annihilating people to own this place. I expand on it by saying his morally great character is continually seen in his inaction towards injustices perpetrated by Sagety and Smasher. Now, it's kind of an interesting thing that in elaboration, as I said, it is an optional thing. It is just saying, hey, this is where we see it. He's kind of this morally grey or ambiguous character, and slowly he starts towards immorality or immorality. So we have, for instance, here's our examples, and here is a beautiful cohesive device. Okay, so I'm saying is seen as in action towards injustices, and that's the start of it because he doesn't act. So, for instance, when he investigates the poisoning of the natives on Darky Creek and decides after assisting the dying boy that there seemed nothing to be done except walk back to the boat, showing the reader that his ambivalence to the child's suffering. So he is showing that he is morally kind of in a conundrum because he feels bad but not enough to actually do anything. So he's kind of contradictory because, he does help the boy, gives him some water, then goes, oh, you're dying. Yeah, well, that's all I could do. See you later. I won't tell anyone about it. Okay. And so from here, Thornhill's integrity is tested as the burning of his crops by the Darug people instigates his wife Sal into giving him an ultimatum that she's leaving with or without him for London. So here we start to see the reason or the cause for his avaricious annihilation of the Darug people. His wife's going to leave. She's going to leave not only him, but their land, his land, the one that he's obsessed about, the one that he sees as a child that's part of himself. This sends Thornhill into a spiral of fear for the potential loss of his dreams, which is interrupted by the death of Sagety. So he's kind of like, oh gosh, she's leaving me. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But then Sagety dies. Okay, so that's interrupting it, but it also kind of is another step in leading him to that amoral behaviour that he's heading towards. And thus, when Smasher rallies the locals to massacre the Aboriginal people, Thornhill is primed to support Smasher, as he erroneously, so wrongly believes it is a choice between his wife and his place. Now, this is the quote that would have been better in that paragraph before it, of it's a choice between his wife and his place, and that this horrific action is excusable in making things so that she would stay, as it was worth any price. So he believes that in order to make her stay, it's better to basically kill a whole bunch of innocent people. If that's not obsession, I'm not sure what is. So we see here there's a lot of analysis and interaction, and you see that the quotes that I've put in with a lot of context. So the poisoning on Darky Creek, I now know that's what the situation is, and he's assisting the boy, but after that he decides there's nothing to be done. So that's a direct quote. So before, we've got a bit of contextualizing and then a direct quote showing, and then there's the analysis showing the reader his ambivalence to the child's suffering. So we're seeing his morally grey, amoral behaviour developing. His integrity is tested because because the Aboriginal people burn his crops down, and then Sal goes, that's it, it's their land, let's get lost. But he is fearful because he can't let go of it. He cannot let go of it, not for the safety of his family, not for the safety of the Darug people, even not for the safety of anyone, because he needs it. It's part of him now. And his potential loss of dreams. So Smasher gets him at the right time, and everyone's like, oh, he died. They want revenge for Sagitty's death. But Thornhill doesn't want revenge. Thornhill just wants to get rid of them. And the easiest way to get rid of them is to kill them, is what he believes, because it's worth any price if she's going to stay. And then I finish with palpably, again, another cohesive device, so evidently or clearly, his self-obsession with occupying this land. A symbol, oh, nice, put in a nice little analysis of the symbolism within the text for freedom and security, causes him to focus only on his own desires rather than the consequences his actions had on not only himself but also his family. So he doesn't think about what the consequences are going to be for himself and his family. And we know as we go on, and the next paragraph would go on to look at, is how Dick basically leaves his family, is disintegrating. Sal kind of falls back within herself and is no longer as close to him as he was. And this self-obsession that he has is basically the cause of it. So we can see that that's a better example of how to write a paragraph. But what you're really wanting to do is just make sure you analyze each quote that you put in and give context to that quote. Don't just chuck it in. Make sure you give a background of this is what's happening when he says this, or she thinks this, or they do this. Okay, and then you'll have a beautiful paragraph and your teacher will be really happy with you. So study hard, write beautifully, and I'll be back with you another time. Bye.